Teammates, we are back once again. If this is your first time listening to the Move Swiftly podcast, welcome to the show. Welcome to the #1 show on innovative teamwork. You can go look it up yourself. It's been consistently #1 on innovative teamwork for a reason. To my regular listeners, again, you've probably tired of hearing me say it, but I'm going to say it again. Shout out to podmatch.com that has reignited this show. All right. For a while there, I was just doing a lot of solo episodes because all the logistical work and finding guests and all that stuff was getting too tedious. But Podmatch has solved that problem, and you're going to start to see a regular stream of guests come on, like really powerful guests when it comes to that. So shout out to podmatch.com. As far as today's guest, listen, there's going to be a lot of similarities. There's so much that we have in common. And you as listeners, the majority of you guys are business owners. You're going to really want to tune in a lot to what he says, because one of the things when you look him up is, turning managers into leaders. And you guys have heard me say that over and over and over and over again. It's so very important, especially with the resurgence, I don't know if you call it surgence, of remote work now that's done and how we have access to people. So with all that, Mr. Dr. Andy Neillie, I don't want to make the intro too long because I can. Welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Oh, glad to be with you. I feel like I found a fellow kind of teamwork and leadership junkie. You and I have been trading background off of websites and stuff, and I think we've got a lot in common. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Yes, and let's just start it off exactly where it needs to be started off, because so many people, not many, but so few people, a lot of people want to do this, but they don't speak it as often and as boldly as you speak it, is you first and foremost talk about your faith in Jesus Christ. And I love that, because it's so important when we're talking quality leadership, when we're talking business. A lot of people don't understand the tie-in between having a walk of faith and being bold and talking about how much they love Jesus Christ and how much they walk that faith. So, to start things off, why don't you just kind of go in a little bit on that, and how where your walk of faith developed and how you see it helping in your business, and then we'll go from there.
Wow. Well, thank you for the privilege of the platform to talk about that. And like you, yeah, my faith informs everything I do. That doesn't mean you have to be a holy roller, but my journey has been a lifetime journey. I became a follower of Christ very early. Don't come from a churched home, but God smiled on me even as a youth, and I became a follower of Jesus at a young age. And then as I emerged into, growing up, I'm reading in the Gospels about this servant leader who's sacrificing everything for us. And then I'm working for some of my initial bosses that are just bad bosses. And I'm comparing this model of servant leadership, leading from the front, but leading with sacrifice, to Jerry, who had anger management issues and whacked on me with an open stapler on a job site one day. And I'm just seeing this disconnect, and it ignited in me a passion around some of the very same things you talk about. Not everybody is wired to be a leader, but if you do aspire to leadership, this is a heavy responsibility. It's a sacred calling, if you would.
I didn't plan on you getting there this early, but you did trigger me when I did hear, I listened to you on a few other podcasts, and you mentioned that boss that actually put his hands on you and threw a stapler at you and things like that. And that triggered me, because when I was in high school, I was a sophomore in high school, I had something similar happen to me. I was assaulted by two, they were supposed to be trainers, but these were adults, teachers, that, draped me up steps, slammed me against the wall, and threw me into the principal's office. And it was a huge thing. It was an absolute, it shook me to my core when I think about how innocent, how reserved of a young man I was. And then, again, 2 years I played on the football team, was a captain of the football team, and everything kind of went as I kind of shrugged it under the rug for a long time, and I was afraid to talk about it. But like you said, when these things happen, you have to step up and lead. It wasn't until, maybe George Floyd happened and I saw everybody coming out, and I saw I have an obligation when these things start happening to get out of your comfort zone, to be courageous enough to speak on it and say, this is wrong. This is wrong. Teammates or audience, listeners, whatever you want to call yourself today. All right. it is so very important that you speak boldly about this, because you can be helping somebody else. You can be touching somebody else in so many different ways. All right. So, with that, since you started there, once that happened, what were kind of the next steps when it comes to, building your own business, writing your own books? Now, I believe you're a keynote speaker, you manage a lot of different business. Kind of fill us in the blank between,
Well,
that
I
time
wish I could tell you
what's
it's
going on now.
all been strategic. It in many
Mm-hmm.
respects, it's just been kind of hand of God. Like you,
Mm-hmm.
people have told me since I was in seventh grade, boy, you're a gifted communicator. You've got a way with words, and so finding an opportunity to be in front of crowds or in front of groups, small groups and large groups, was kind of natural for me, and so having some what the speaker profession calls platform capabilities tied together with my passion around good leadership, they really just all kind of came together. I wish I could tell you I built this strategic plan of I'm going to launch Neillie Leadership Group and we're going to do this and that. That's not really what happened. It happened almost organically, but 25 years later, I've got 5 million frequent flyer miles from being flown all over the world to work with managers and coaches and emerging leaders on what's the difference really between having a management position where you're in charge of tasks and projects and PERT charts and to-do lists and becoming a leader. They're not oppositional, but just because you're manager doesn't automatically make you a leader. And you've talked about it in several of your podcasts, and respecting the team members. And so I've just been talking about that at this point for my entire adult career, since I was a high school teacher and football coach like you a number of years ago, and then transitioned into corporate training and doing work inside Christian organizations, but mainly doing work inside marketplace organizations where people don't necessarily get top level leadership training. Very few people go to Harvard or Yale or someplace like that. The Chucks in the trucks, the Dans with the vans who now have 10 vans and 30 people working for them. How do they know if they're a leader and not just a manager? That's where I think I'm supposed to have a bit of a voice into that universe.
Now, when you're having a conversation with, so how do you diagnose that? Because there's so much, especially in you and I were in the education world. There's people that come with their certifications. There's people that come with their degrees. There's people that come with so much. I deserve a certain salary because this school gave me this degree, this license, this certification, and they feel very entitled. Not that they're not smart people, not that they're not brilliant, but because of what they have on their resume, the accolades, the affiliations, they walk into interviews, they walk into conversations, already turning real leaders off. So how do you go about, sort of systemizing this and diagnosing where a person's sort of going wrong, when in the conversation?
Well, first of all, just like you, there are audiences I work with, there are leaders that hire me that I just realized not too far into the engagement, you know what, they're wasting their money and I'm wasting my time. We're just not going to find a connection. And so we agree that we're not on the same page. I also use some assessment tools, 360 assessments. I think you've spent some time working with teams and team building. I think we both know that the data doesn't lie. And if you do a 360 assessment, a 360 confidential assessment of somebody's leadership prowess. And if people are in an environment where they know it's a confidential assessment and they can be honest, the data doesn't lie. And so we coach to that. And you and I talked ahead of time. What I've been looking for decades at this point, and really identifying what helps somebody transition from that manager position to that high performing leader. And I'm pretty convinced it's these 4 leadership necessities that you and I talked about shortly before we started the podcast: conviction, competence, character, and covenant. And when people are growing in those 4 areas, they can begin to answer for themselves, am I on the path to becoming a high performing leader?
And so all 4 of those, and just so we're clear, listeners, it's very important that you get a core of understanding, because the first one he said was conviction. And I actually remember reading the GM, I believe it was Tom Callahan, the GM by Tom Callahan. He talked about Ernie Aksori. This was the GM of the New York Giants. All right. And there was a segment there where they were talking about drafting Eli Manning. And there was kind of a conversation between GM and head coach. And they said, when you're looking for quarterbacks, it is about the first thing he said, which is conviction.
Yeah.
Half the time they're not even looking, they're not even looking for guys like, yes, you got to be talented, you got to be able to play and all that. But we're looking on the sideline. You know, do your teammates respond to you? Does your O-line look out for you? Does your wide receivers believe in you? And then the same thing holds true when you're interviewing for people that are going to run your organization, be the face of it. Right. Do you have the conviction? Number one was conviction. The next one was competence. Then the next one was covenant and communications, correct?
Character, and then covenant. Yeah. But yeah, and they're not necessarily in any order, but these four need to be in evidence and growing. Yeah, and your point about. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, just your point about Eli Manning. If we take a look at him physically, he didn't have some of the tools. And gosh, all of us who know anything about professional football, we've seen the videos of Tom Brady's, draft combine. If you were looking at simply physical tools, you would never think this was going to become the greatest quarterback in NFL, history. But that passion, that strategy, that execution, having your eyes up, seeing the bigger picture, knowing that you can't just be consumed with what's in front of you. And in the business world, you need to be thinking 18 months out, 3 years out. What's our competition doing? What's the impact of offshore and political and societal changes? Those all roll into this area of conviction, that bigger picture that you touched on.
Okay, yeah, and that actually leads me to a question, because this is raw organic stuff. You as listeners know this is how I roll. There's no notes. We just keep it all the way raw. When it comes to character and conviction, though, they kind of move in the same direction. How do you defer the two?
Yeah. So on the one hand, I would say you're right. They blend together, but on the other hand, I would say conviction probably is perhaps born out of character, but that simple definition of character is your character is when nobody's watching you. So there's no need to be in front of anybody. Character. It's the moral culpability. It's the fair-mindedness. It's the honest. It's the self-effacing. It's what you talked about in one of your podcasts earlier this spring in April, where leaders eat last. There's just this understanding that I'm not the most important person in this organization. That the leadership challenge, that wonderful book that's gone through so many printings at this point. One of the defining characteristics that they've found cross-culturally, cross-generationally, on all continents that they've done this assessment over decades at this point is that whole honesty and fair-mindedness and other-oriented and selflessness. They're at the core of why people would want to respond to you. That's character, what you do when nobody watches.
Yes, and this is a very important distinction he's making, guys, because sometimes conviction and confidence can be misstrued. All right, without character, you'll feel it's not genuine. All right, you get a guy who has the talent, especially if we're talking football, that has the talent. He's walking around like a confident person, but the character piece isn't there. And then as soon as there's a hiccup, as soon as there's some uncomfort, that's when the real character shows. It's almost like when I was learning physics as a ninth grader. We spent a whole week, Andy, on just math. We spent the whole week on math, and the teacher's name is Mr. DeHaas. I'm like, what are we doing here? I thought this was a physics class. He goes, you cannot learn the subject if you don't learn to speak the language or something like that. And that's the difference. Having the character piece, right, then the conviction happens. You can't have the other piece. You can't just walk around acting like you know it all, because that's what I encounter every single day. I see it every single day. There's people who walk around with the confidence that they deserve X, Y, and Z, but their character piece, when you really get them behind closed doors, the kind of stuff they say is absolutely insane and criminal. So, to that, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And using your football parallel, you and I have both seen high school athletes who were incredibly naturally gifted. It came easy to them, but you wouldn't know when they were in high school that they lacked the personal character of getting into the weight room early in the morning, of watching opponents' films on Mondays and Tuesdays in preparation for Friday night's games. It didn't need to show up because they were just bigger, faster, stronger than the rest of their high school teammates. But then they moved to college And that inner work that they didn't do, that they got away with earlier in their career, they don't get away with anymore. And you and I have seen the same thing happen even at the college level, where there are some phenomenal athletes who at the college level can still pull it off, partly because of just their native fast twitch muscle fibers. But they don't do that hard work that you and I are talking about, and they try to move to the next level. And all of a sudden, that first round draft choice is a bust because they had the competence, but they didn't invest the character to bring the best out of themselves.
Right. And it's our job as leaders, as listeners, as myself and you, Dr. to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable to point these things out in young people. We don't have the luxury of being excited in the moment and just kind of praising them. There has to be a constant grind in showing them that part of themselves, explaining that, because when it gets hit, when it hits the fan, they got to know how to respond, and it will hit the fan. Things will be difficult for you. There will be challenging things in life. So, with that, it kind of brings me to the next thing, the next talking point when it comes to what you're doing is, you don't walk around talking about your accolades. You don't walk around saying, you went to this business school and this is how you learned this lesson. And obviously you have done a lot of great things. But one of the things that caught my attention was the fact that you and your wife rescue dogs. That you rescue dogs, and you found something in that actually helped you leader and helped you when it comes to actually the work you do. So this was by far the first time I've heard it. I've been doing this show for 4 years now. This is probably be over 800 episodes at this point, and this was the first time I heard it. So please, fill us in, fill us in on how that came about.
Well, and I'll even say for those of you that are watching the podcast and not just listening to it, if you look over my shoulder, our most recent rescue, Traveler, you can see his brown snout and his black body laying on the daybed in our home office here. Aswan, I wish once again I could tell you it was strategic. I'm going to become a best-selling author because I decided to do so. I've written a couple of books, but it really was simply like you. I try to have my eyes open, and I had a speech that I was delivering using my platform skills, a number of years ago, that was called the Redford Principle. One of the dogs we rescued, Redford, came from a horrible puppy mill environment. He was one of 66 dogs that were rescued and distributed all over the country. We live in Austin, Texas. The Houston Golden Retriever Rescue Group ended up with Redford, and we were looking for a new dog at that point, and Redford ended up in our home. Oswald, until this Heinz 57 dog over my shoulder showed up, my wife and I have only rescued golden retrievers. Golden retrievers are easy. They're just, they're smart and they want to love you, and they're easy. And so you don't have to work very hard to be a good golden retriever owner.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But not with Redford. Redford urinated the first time I looked at him, and he hid for weeks and months, and no matter what we did, he wouldn't trust us. I was traveling a great deal at that time. And I would come home after midnight, last plane in, I would land, I'd get to the airport, I'd drive home. I'd get to the house, everything was dark, and, I'm home, and I'd drop my suitcase, drop my backpack, I'm home, and expect everybody in the household to come running to the dad and father who conquered again. And every time I dropped the suitcase after midnight in the hallway next to our bedroom and shouted out, "I'm home," I'd send Redford into a panic. I had to learn different ways to lead him. So for instance, those of us that are dogs know they do this cute little play bow. They put their arms out in front of them and their tail is up in the air. And basically what they're saying is, "Hey, you want to be friends with me?" And they do that with other dogs. And Aswan, I'm not embarrassed to say to all of your followers, there were times when our trainer told me, "Andy, you got to do a play bow with Redford. You got to let him know you're safe." And really the principle became, and this ties right in with your passion around leadership and teamwork. Leaders need to meet team members where they're at and not expect team members to move toward leaders. And that's a key insight. Your story about Coach Art just touched my heart. I've got a similar coach in my life that saw something special and leaned into that special thing. And so getting down to their level, learning that a good yes is better than a bad no. 8 or 10 different lessons. And so at one point, a publisher said, man, that's a great story. You got any other stories? And a year later, the Golden Principles came out, life and leadership lessons from a rescued dog. And somebody at Amazon took a liking to it and featured it on their Kindle app. And all of a sudden, I get to call myself a best-selling author. Don't ask my wife how much money I've made as a best-selling author, because we're still significantly in the red. But they're just sweet stories about how do you build trust? How do you increase influence? How do you earn the right to have a voice? And that, of course, is what you and I are both passionate about, good leadership around.
Yeah, and it's very important that what needs to be taken away from that as listeners, and what I'm taking away from that as listeners, it started to become him. This principle, this idea, this being the person that is not going down the road of just managing, and not going down the road of just having, just a sort of a stable 9 to 5 and just doing whatever. But he started to care. And one of the most common phrases that I'm sure you've heard and I've said on the show thousands of times is the people that are underneath you, the students, the teammates, whatever you want to call them, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Yeah. Say it again. They don't care how much you know, they know how much you care. This is even true in the dog world. And he started caring so much that he could have went to a golden retriever. They're easy, they're chilling, they're whatever. But he wanted to learn it because he can apply it to his business. So,
yeah. Well, and that really led me, we touched on 3 of the 4 leadership necessities. We touched on conviction. We rolled competence and character in together. That really, Aswan, that became the final identifier for me. I wrestled for a number of years with really being able to capture what I was observing good leaders like you doing. And then I realized, and it ties right into what we're talking about, this term covenant is kind of an old-fashioned term, although Guy Ritchie brought it back to the forefront with an excellent but pretty gruesome Guy Ritchie movie a year or so ago. But this concept of covenant, let me take a minute and explain what covenant is, because the best leaders I work with, I'm not sure they know what covenant means, but they practice it. Here in the state of Texas, where I live, if you're going to get married, obviously there is the feelings of love and affection, and better and worse, and sickness and in health, for richer, for poor, the romantic love. And so you get married. There's that personal side. The other thing, though, and I suspect this is true in most states, here in Texas, if you get married, there is a formal document that the officiant signs that's recorded with the Secretary of State. There is both a formal and a relational side of this covenant. And when I finally realized that's what good leaders do, yeah, they're the boss. Yeah, they're the one that holds people accountable. They've got the numbers for the quarter that they're looking at, or the projects that have to be completed, or the agile sprint that's got to be done in the software that's got to be launched. Whatever that formal outcome is that manager who's becoming a leader is responsible for. And then, Aswan, you could tell stories, and I could tell stories of people that we've coached and worked with and been privileged to be alongside where, you know what, yeah, but his employee needed another 3 weeks of PTO because the parent was struggling with bad cancer, and he had already used up all his PTO, but it was the right thing to do. And somehow that boss just made it happen. There was that personal side as well as the formal structured side. And that's what I realized good leaders. And you and I have both told stories about coaches we've had that, yeah, they were the coach and somebody swore in the huddle and we weren't allowed to swear. And all of a sudden we're doing stadiums, right? And that's also the coach came out of their own pocket to send somebody to the state banquet because the kid came from a broken home and didn't have money to go to the state banquet. That very same coach is holding people accountable and demonstrating self-sacrifice to put that person forward. That's covenant. That's in some respects maybe the most powerful leadership necessity of all.
It is, and it lasts so long. I mean, the stories you're telling about when it comes to Coach Art and Coach Brian and all the coaches I've had, these things happened over 20 years ago, guys. And I can talk to you like it happened yesterday because they're so rare. They're so rare, and it's important that you really take in these lessons and understand they're going to help you when you encounter all of the struggles that are guaranteed to come your way, because there's not a lot of people that are willing to go out and lead. So, with that, Andy, I do want to be very respectful of your time, and I want to make sure we get this in. What would be the best way for people to get in touch with you? What's next? What are you working on in the future?
You bet. Well, thanks for the privilege. Yeah, they can find me at neillieleadership.com. And the good thing is my name is spelled distinctly enough that if you get it right, you're going to find me. Neillie. You and I both have gone through life having our names mispronounced and misspelled, but neillieleadership.com. The other thing, Aswan, about a year ago, I started making available, I've got an 8-page ebook that talks about leadership communication. It's got a coaching model in it. It's got how to hold a hard conversation. It's got affirmation models in it. And if somebody wants to simply go to leadershipmaterials.com, they can download this 8-page ebook that's got some simple models as well as some worksheets to fill out. So leadershipmaterials.com or neillieleadership.com. And if somebody's really interested, there's a link on my website where they can book a 15-minute phone call with me, and I'd be glad to have this conversation. Aswan, thank you. What a passion. It was so fun when we got connected. I thought, man, he may be in Florida, but I've got a brother of a different mother, I think, here, the way you're passionate about teamwork and team sustenance and leadership.
You absolutely do, man. You absolutely do. And that's what these devices should be used for, because, again, we have all these distractions. We have all these things. Get your voice out there. Get to know people. Get your message out there. He said it perfectly when it comes to the platform and figuring these things out. If you really want it, you will figure out how to get with the right people. And that is very, very important that you take that into consideration, listeners, because there's no more excuses. There really isn't. You don't have any more excuses, and you can't be, just chilling, or you can't be looking at these connection devices and just looking at it and not taking advantage of it. So, with that, Andy, here's how I close out all my shows. I want you to use your imagination a little bit. Go back to the young man who just got a stapler thrown at his head. Just kind of pretend that guy is degrading. And again, I know that feeling personally. As degrading and as low as that person, that feeling is, just pretend that person has come back and he's in the Zoom room. Talk him through, give him some words of encouragement, and we'll officially close with that.
Well, I mean, nothing that you and I've said is original in the last 20 minutes. The truth matter is we're in a 2,000-year journey of effective leadership. You get much beyond Jesus Christ and Marcus Aurelius, and there's really nothing new. But one of the staples of effective leadership that's really transformed the world over those last 2,000 years is just remembering you'll never be a better leader than you are a person. Leadership starts with you first.
Man, that's powerful. That is powerful, man. And you actually took me somewhere there, because one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten was from my high school coach. He was talking to some of the young linebackers. This was like a year after I graduated. Yeah, maybe about 3 years after I graduated from college. And I was struggling, trying to figure things out. And he was telling the young linebackers, hey, this was a much better person than he was a player. All right. That was the greatest compliment I think I've ever gotten. Yeah. And, especially, I know there's a lot of football players that listen to the show. When you get your coaches saying those things, regardless if you make it to the NFL or not, you want them saying, look, this was a much better person than he was a player. That always touches my heart. So, again, appreciate the work you do. Please, Andy, make sure you stay in touch. We'll figure something out. In fact, I believe that this recording is going to be coming out around football season. So it's definitely going to be some great things that we got to collaborate on. So make sure we stay in touch.
Let's do that.
Fellow teammates, continue to move swiftly. We will talk more soon.